welcome to this month's Twilight session. So presentation today is on ancient woodland indicator species. It's being delivered by myself, Gabriel. So brief overview of what I'll be discussing in today's presentation. First is, what is an ancient woodland? How do we define it? Why should we care about them? What we are doing, and by we, I mean the Merseyside Biobank. Indicator species, what are they? How can we spot them? And then we're going to have a brief, or maybe not so brief, depending on what Brenda wants, chat about the characteristics of ancient trees. I'll let Brenda introduce herself when we get to that point. So to start off with, what is an ancient woodland? Well, 5,000 years ago, if we cast our minds, imagine we're Neolithic Britons, and the entire Isles would have likely been covered in woodland. But since that sort of Stone Age time, we've been steadily clearing across the entire island, getting to where we are currently, which is about 10% of England being forested. Now, the majority of that forested area is plantation. So we get a lot of conifer plantations, a lot of semi-natural regeneration. But an ancient woodland is particularly important, and the way we would define that is a woodland that's existed for a considerable length of time, and for England that is since 1600 AD. The reason we've sort of landed on that is relatively arbitrary. It's mostly to do with maps, and that's when we essentially have decent maps of England, so we can track if a woodland's existed in that place for that length of time. And it's slightly different in the rest of the UK. I think in Scotland it's 1750 for the same reason. That's when their maps sort of came into action. So if we take that definition into account, about 2.6% of England is covered by ancient woodland, which is quite a steep drop from what would have been 100% 5,000 years ago. So saying that it's been around for 500 years, close to, doesn't necessarily mean that all the trees in an ancient woodland are that old. I'm sure there are some that get very close, but the vast majority of them aren't going to be anywhere near that. But that's fine. All we're really worried about is that the site has existed as a woodland for that time frame. So ancient woodlands can include ancient semi-natural woodland, which will be made up of native trees, and they're usually naturally regenerated, so the trees will naturally grow, die, reseed, and continue that cycle. And that may have been helped by humans throughout time. There might be copse in them, might be pollard in them, might be using them for timber. The idea is that they've been allowed to regenerate and they've not been clear felled. It also includes plantations on ancient woodland sites. So that means it may have historically been an ancient woodland, it retains some of those features, but at some point it may have been cleared and reseeded with a different species or had to regenerate again. But all the important things such as the undisturbed soil, the ground flora and the fungi all still generally remain. This is a map of the green outline. There is the area that we cover here at the Merseyside Biobank, and this sort of band of the country, starting at Liverpool, going across Manchester, over towards Leeds and Yorkshire way, is actually one of the poorest areas in the country for ancient woodlands. A lot of the area here has been cleared quite extensively. And looking at this map, all these sort of little red dots plotted around there are all of the current ancient woodlands included in the inventory. And as you can see, there isn't really that many of them. But I thought I'd pick out one example and just to take you through the years. And it's relatively arbitrary which one I picked. I picked the one sort of at the bottom, in the middle, just above where it says Hale. We've got a little sliver of it inside our bounds. But as you can see, this was designated an ancient woodland in the traditional method, which is sort of a map survey. So the earliest maps that I had easy access to were the 1840s. And you can see we've got the outline of Millwood there. As we progress through time, 50 years on, it's still there, relatively unchanged. 30 years on, still there, relatively unchanged. Another 30 years on, still mostly the same. And then we get to today, and it still looks mostly the same, apart from the A road that they put through there at some point. But the majority of that ancient woodland is still there, and that means that all the biodiversity and the species assemblage that's built up there over all of those years is likely to have been retained. But maps aren't the be-all and end-all of ancient woodlands. It's fantastic for examples like Millwood, where we can go back through the maps, you can see it's remained there unchanged for all of those years. But not all areas of the UK have been mapped to that high fidelity, especially over those hundreds of years, and in particular smaller sites. So the ancient woodland inventory we had a look at on that map with the red dots, all of those sites would have been bigger than 2 hectares, and that's sort of the cut-off point for the inventory. But anything smaller than that hasn't really been catalogued up until now. So the alternative to maps is we can look at species assemblage, and that's sort of what the gist of today's presentation is about. And they're an alternate indicator that a site, a woodland site, might be an ancient woodland. So why should we care about ancient woodlands? If I've said that the vast majority of woodland has been clear felled in the UK, and the majority of those that still exist are plantation, why should we really care? Well, the obvious answer is that it takes hundreds of years for it to establish, and it's irreplaceable unless you have a few hundred years to spare for it to grow back again. So for all intents and purposes, especially within our lifetimes, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no way of getting it back, really. And it's not just the wood, the trees itself. There's lots of associated wildlife. So you get a lot of saprophilic inverts or fungi, which are organisms that basically live on these ancient trees, and they're all breaking down living matter. So a lot of really rare species. One that pops to mind is the violet clip beetle, which is only found in 3 places in the UK, and they're all restricted to these ancient woodlands. So as soon as the woodland goes, we lose all of those species. Similar with the soil, woodland, as you know, is really good at retaining the soil. All the roots keep and hold and bind everything together. So the soils in these sites are going to be markedly different to elsewhere. And you're going to have lots of different seeds in the seed bank there that have been retained. They're great for carbon storage. All of those trees that live for that long, they're pulling carbon from the atmosphere, using it to build their bodies essentially. And until they die, which could be hundreds of years' time, that carbon's captured within them. It's not getting re-released back into the atmosphere. They're great for genetic diversity. So I mentioned that with the seed bank, but also with the species that are currently living there. The alternative sort of forestry that we have, which is sort of this plantation forestry, a lot of the plants there are going to be very similar genetically. There's going to be a lot of hegemony there. On these older sites, of lots of different genetic diversity that's been allowed to sort of accumulate and grow and diversify over time. And then you have some less ecological sort of benefits, more social benefits, recreation, health and well-being. So whilst all woodlands are great, and I'm sure if you went to a plantation woodland like on the Second Coast, you still have a lovely time, you still see lots of nice stuff. But there's something a little bit different about these veteran trees where you can see the age of them, you can see that they've been around for hundreds, thousands of years, and you can just think about all the things that they've witnessed, all the different invaders that they've been through, and all the people that have sat with them or sat underneath them. Is something that I think can't be understated. I guess that ties in as well to the cultural, historical, and landscape value. These trees have been part of their local communities for years, and they might be used for all sorts of stuff. And it's only really in recent history where attitudes have changed and that maybe seen as more disposable now. So that's why we should care. And that was reflected in the National Planning Policy Framework. So this is sort of the national guidelines for planning applications. It says that development that results in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats, and it specifically mentions ancient woodland and ancient arboreal trees, should be refused. So that's fantastic. The government says, don't chop them down. They're really important. They agree with us. And then they continue saying, unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and suitable compensation strategies. And they specifically mention nationally significant infrastructure projects, which includes the HS2, which is an ongoing sort of project. And the map on the screen there is from the HS2 website. And that's just phase 1 of HS2. And I think they go through 30 odd ancient woodland sites. And then phase 2, which sees it going from Birmingham up to Manchester, has the potential to impact another 47. So despite acknowledging that these sites are incredibly important, and once they're gone, they're gone. If it's something like a high-speed railway, well, it's too bad. Get out of the way. But we care at the biobank. I'm sure if it was up to us, we would be building railway through them. And we're actually involved in helping sort of identify and protect ancient woodland sites that may have been overlooked in the past. So we are leading on a Natural England project, an ancient woodland inventory project, and that's updating the inventory that you saw earlier. So we'll have a few more sites added to that when it's done. And we're being supported by MIAS. And the project is primarily focusing on identifying small areas of woodland which are less than 2 hectares, which wouldn't have been picked up initially on that inventory. And the aim is to get them added to the national inventory so that they can receive that protection from a planning point of view, as well as just knowing that they're there, knowing how to look after them properly, sort of preserve them. And as I mentioned earlier, mapping isn't necessarily the best way of going about identifying these. Maps, especially old maps, only really concern themselves with large sites or sites of importance, parks, royal hunting grounds, big forests. So those small sort of local wooded areas might have been missed out. So instead, we are primarily focusing on indicator species. And as part of the project, we worked with a local botanical expert to pull together a list of potential woodland indicator species. And then we're working on identifying where they are across North Merseyside and then doing sort of surveying to back up the thought, if this could be an ancient woodland, is it still one? So that surveying started in spring 2023 and it's going to be repeated annually. So these indicator species, surveys are mentioned, they can be carried out sort of April, so now through to June, ideally when plants are starting to come into flower and they're going to be easiest to identify. The reason that these indicator species can be used to identify ancient woodlands is because they need a long-term stable woodland cover to survive and establish themselves, as a lot of them are very slow growing and they're very prone to being outcompeted by more vigorous plants. So examples of that are bramble, other shrubs, birch, willow, can easily invade areas of cleared woodland and they can smother the delicate plants. And the removal of these ancient trees also removes some of the fungi and lichen that are associated with the trees themselves. Going back to that earlier point, it's not just the trees that are important, it's sort of this interconnected ecosystem. Once you remove the trees, all of those other things sort of fall down. Another thing to note is that indicator species vary depending on where you are in the country. So if you were to Google ancient woodland indicator species, you get lots of different lists, and it's worth sort of thinking about where that list was from. If you had a look at a list from the southeast of England, you get lots of different species because the habitat's very different. So that's why, as part of this project, we had to sort of devise our own North Merseyside list that would match what we'd expect to see in ancient woodlands here. So the next bit of this presentation is sort of bringing up a few of these indicator species that we included on our list. Now, the ones that are shown on here, it's not exhaustive, it's roughly about half of them, but I don't want to have way too much stuff on the screen. But if you are interested in sort of helping us survey some of these sites in future, you can contact us and get the full list, as well as some sites that you can look at. And we basically split this list up into different classes, basically relating to how good an indicator they are. So on the screen there, we have a list of some of our class 1 indicator species, and these are restricted to ancient and probably primary woodland. So these species on their own are a good indicator that we've got an ancient woodland going. And if you were to find them somewhere, it means it's somewhere that we'll be interested in sort of doing a bit further research into to see if we've got any of the other indicator species, or if we can uncover something through sort of like an archaeological search or a mapping search. Moving down the classes, we have class 2. So these are species often found in ancient woodland, and they can survive if a woodland is felled, and they can recolonize a secondary woodland which develops on the site. And again, we've got a list of them there. Again, these are great indicators. We'd also consider these as good reasons to investigate the site. But the main distinction is that these could be secondary woodlands, whereas the first ones are more likely to be from primary woodlands. We have class 3. So these are species which are typical of ancient woodlands, but they may also grow in unimproved grasslands, under bracken, or alongside stream banks from which woodland cover has been lost. So they're still valuable, but ideally we want to see a few of the other species there before we start to consider it a viable candidate for being an ancient woodland. The list is there, and you might notice that a couple of them are sort of highlighted in that darker green, which are bluebell and wood anemone. And if they're found in sort of carpets, they get bumped up basically to class 1. A few individuals is class 3, but for them to establish in that sort of carpet growth form suggests that there would have been an ancient woodland there previously for them to get to that sort of stage. And the final class is class 4, which species that are characteristic for ancient woodland, but they can also be found growing at least one other habitat. So whilst they're still useful to see, they're more of a confirmation thing. We have that and some class 1, class 2, class 3s. It's a lot stronger than if we just have these guys, because they can grow in alternate habitats. So again, I've pared the list down even further, and I'm just going to point out a few that are relatively easy to identify. And if you guys were out and about in a woodland in Merseyside and you spot them, we'd be very interested in getting your records. So you take a note of it and send it over to us. We'll add it to our database, and it'll help us inform that inventory update. The first one is Ransons, which are amazing. I don't know if you guys have seen them before, but I love them. I've been quite a lot of field trips where these have complemented my lunch when I've been out and about. And they're likely smelled before being seen. So it's got this alternate name of wild garlic, and that's the smell. This garlic, they're allium family, so closely related to garlic and onions. They have very thick leaves with entire margins, and they have these umbels of white star-like flowers. And that was a class 1 indicator. Another class 1 indicator we have is an early dog violet. So it's a solitary violet flower on a relatively hairless stem. Leaves are heart-shaped and the margins are toothed, and they grow in shady places. We've seen dog violets before, and they look very similar. However, these are early dog violets, and the main difference is the spur, which is sort of the backside of the flower, is darker than the petals. It doesn't have a little notch in the top. If you see a violet that has those characteristics, again, take a note of it. Would be interested in finding out. It's also worth saying that if you were out and about and you spotted these things but you weren't sure about the ID, take some pictures. You can always ask us, like you can ask other botanical experts. You're happy to verify them for you. But yeah, we just really love to know if you've spotted them. Next we have bird cherry. So shrub to tree size, this one. It has 5 petals, white flowers, which grow in these long spiked clusters, which makes them distinct from your normal cherries, which tend to grow in sort of tight clusters. The fruit sort of grow in the cherries that you see in the supermarket, whereas this fruit grows in this long spiky pattern as well, and they're dark, almost black. As for the bark, it's quite similar to your other cherries that you see. It's got this smooth bark, and they've got the horizontal lenticels, which is sort of like, they look almost like a scar going across the trunk of the tree. The crab apples. Now, crab apples are a little bit tricky because you do get orchard crab apples, which will look slightly different and tend to have pink fruit as opposed to green. But wild crab apples should have small, finely toothed oval leaves. They should have small yellow-green fruit, and they often have very gnarled and twisted grey-brown bark. Fox Mercury, which is another indicator species. It grows again across the ground. That's where big mats, if you've got it. Has long, hairy, pointed leaves with toothed edges. It has small green flowers with 3 sepals. I don't know if you can see the picture at the bottom here. You can see the sepals quite clearly. Look like petals, but aren't petals. And they're normally present quite early in the year, sort of springtime. And one thing I learned about making this presentation that Alina told me is that they're separate male and female plants. So you get slightly different flowers depending on which one you've got. When you find a carpet of them, they're all likely going to either be male or they're going to be female. But the main difference is the flowers themselves. So at the bottom, you've got the 2 small pictures. The one on the left shows a female plant, which has these 2 white styles coming out of it, whereas the male one has lots of anthers coming out that are spherically tipped. If you find fruit as well, you'll only find the fruit on the female plants. Next, we have bluebells, which I guess if there was a poster child of ancient woodland indicator species, it would be these guys, because they're familiar. I think everyone, even if they have no botanical knowledge, will be able to spot a bluebell. At least most people will. I hope so. And they grow in huge mats across woodland floors, and they're almost a national symbol here because we have about 25% estimated bluebell population in the UK across the world. The issue with bluebells is that they are at risk from the introduced Spanish bluebell, which is an issue because it both outcompetes the native bluebells and it can hybridize with them. If you wanted to be able to tell the difference between the 2, I've got pictures there at the bottom. Common bluebell, which is the native one, have these droopy flower spikes with all the flowers on one side, and the pollen's creamy white. I also tend to think that the native ones have sort of a longer bell shape than the Spanish ones. The Spanish ones don't have those characteristics, and they have blue or green pollen. Does anyone want to guess which one is the native one? They're shown on the screen. Everyone is pointing at the right one. Very good. See, you all be able to identify your woodland indicator species no problem when you're out in the field. Awesome. Next we have wood sorrel. Again, I love this one. I'm really into that foraging. So the ransons and the sorrel are great. So they have these clover-like leaves, which fold up at night. They have a distinct taste. An oxalis. So you've got oxalic acid in them. It tastes very tart. And please, if you're not confident in your ID, don't eat things to try and identify them. Wait until you're out with someone that knows definitely what it is and have a go. But they do have these white 5-petal flowers with purple veins. And again, the wood sorrel alongside the bluebells are class 3, but if you get carpets of them, you get bumped up to class 1. Okay, and then the last one isn't actually on our North Merseyside species list. But if you know me, I'm really into my bryophytes, and I couldn't resist putting one in at the end, so that people here can learn one bryophyte from the presentation. And thankfully, it's a really easy one. So it's Fluidium tamarascinum. It has this tripinnate branching thing. Tripinnate meaning you have branches, and you have branches on your branches, and then branches on your branches on the branches. Yeah, we only have 2 common tripinnate mosses in the UK, and the reason you can tell Fluidium from the other one, which is Hylocomium spondens, for those who are interested, is that the Fluidium has green stems, whereas the Hylocomium tends to have red stems. And it also has felt-like protrusions on the stems, but we need a hammer to see them. But again, this is touted as an ancient woodland indicator species, but you find it in an awful lot of woodland. But yeah, just something to keep an eye out for. So that's the end of my presentation. So I'll hand over to Brenda now.
Brenda Cameron, and I work for the Ancient Tree Inventory. I volunteer for the Ancient Tree Inventory, where I work as a verifier. And as a verifier, I see some beautiful old ancient trees, and I feel very privileged to do that. But I want to spread the word because I want more people going out and finding these trees. It's because they're not all in ancient woodland. In fact, a lot of them are in pasture land, wood pastures. Some of them are just in somebody's back garden. And basically, we need to find out where they are, give them protection, extra protection, and value them for the wonderful habitats that they are and that they create. So first of all, I'm going to just show you. So this is the life cycle of a tree. We start with a sapling and it goes through to the mature tree, and all of that is fine. It can do that fine. But then as it reaches its optimum age for the species, because all trees don't live the same length of time. So if this were an oak, we'd be looking at it, the very end picture there would be, it could be up to 1,000 years old. But if we were looking at this as a beech, we'd say, well, that's 300 years old. Maybe 350 years old. So according to the species, the tree will become a veteran or an ancient tree sooner, according to the species. Some trees are very hardwood. You've got your oaks, your sweet chestnuts, yews. They have wonderful defense systems, so they last longer. Softwood trees don't tend to last as long, and I'm going to show you why. Because as soon as a tree starts to grow as a sapling, it is invaded by fungi, invertebrates, anything that wants to get in and eat it. So basically, it sends out its defences to capture those. And there we can see the heartwood of the tree. I'm putting it very basically here. The heartwood of the tree, as it grows older, becomes softer and is eaten away by the fungi that has been captured inside there. And if there's any chance of any invertebrates getting in there, they will start to eat it away. So you can see on that slide, the outside, the lighter, the orangey wood is the sapwood. That does the business of taking the nutrients to the leaves, bringing down the sugars, and that's the wood that grows each year. But as the tree gets older, it loses its heartwood. And that's a natural aging process. It isn't something that, oh, the tree's not well, this tree is going to die. It is part of the natural aging of the tree. So that is part of the maturing. And as the tree gets bigger and bigger, it hollows because then it's more stable. If you're standing with your feet together, you can easily get pushed over. A tree has that natural ability to hollow and move out wider and wider, and it stabilizes itself. It is not as easily pushed over. So while the fungi and the invertebrates are eating out the heartwood, this is how we see that on the outside of the tree. This is what we see, and these are called the ancient characteristics by the ancient tree inventory. And we look for these characteristics when we're judging the tree to see if it's a veteran or an ancient, or maybe just a notable tree. It hasn't got to the veteran stage yet. So we look for holes. That rot that's coming from the inside, a branch falls off, you get holes. You get holes in the trunk, you get holes in the branches, and that's the first indicator when you see an old tree. And you all know old trees, they've got holes in. They've got holes where the branch has fallen off and the bark, which protects it, has curled in, but you can still see inside. You can still see a bit of that heartwood. And that heartwood then is attacked by the wood-boring beetles. Wonderful. That's their dinner. And they can't wait to get in there as soon as there's a break in the bark. So when you've dropped the wood, and you can see on the floor there, you've got dead wood on the ground. Around old veteran and ancient trees, you get dropped wood. You get branches that have been too heavy for that aging tree to support, and they drop. And then they are attacked by different fungus. They're a wonderful habitat for different fungus. Living trees rot from the inside, dead trees rot from the outside, basically. And that's what you can see happening there with the dropped branch. But here also look out for, you've got your dead wood in the canopy. You will see fungi on that. You'll see fungi on the outside of that because it's dead. And you get your little wood ears. But if you see the big brackets coming out, Ganoderma coming out, you'll know that's the heartwood. There's a lot of different heartwood fungi that as soon as you start to see their fruiting bodies pushing out through the sapwood in any cracks or any holes, you'll know that tree has got quite a lot of rot on the inside, and it's probably hollowing on the inside. So we're looking for loose bark. We're looking for dead wood. We're looking for epiphytic plants, plants that have found a little bit of soft gathering of leaves and they've started to grow. They're not parasitic. They're not living off the tree. They're living off soil and debris that has gathered in the tree or in the holes in the tree. You are looking for natural water pools, because as the tree grows its beautiful big branches, it causes natural pooling. But that's where the rot sets in as well, because the water helps to soften the wood, and then you get the fungi going through. And that is often the first stage of the branches falling off, where you get the pockets and the fungi have started to rot through. Okay, have I missed anything there? And of course, that's a wonderful habitat. All those holes, all those crevices. It's a wonderful habitat for all the creatures that love to live in holes, and the wood beetles too. Okay, and the ecological valuation trees. I mean, Gabriel has mentioned this. You've got fungi, invertebrates. You've got birds and mammals. They all need ancient trees. A tree is no good to these creatures until it's 200 years old. You plant a new tree, you're not going to get birds in it. You're not going to get insects living in it. You're not going to get fungi in it. It has great defenses and it will shield them all off. However, by the time that tree has got to 200 years old, it's got some holes and it's giving a wonderful habitat for all these different creatures. You'll also see the mycorrhizal fungi under the ground. the fungi that feeds that tree, but does business with that tree, because the mycorrhizal fungi does trading off with the tree roots. So it will bring in phosphates and nitrates for the tree, and the tree will take those and give it glucose, give the fungi the glucose, the sugars that it's photosynthesized in its leaves. So it will bring down the sugars, and they do a trade-off. But also, that mycorrhizal fungi will connect it to other trees. So you've got that connection going on. There's 1,700 invertebrate species that rely on decaying wood, and they don't go far. So you need more than one tree standing on its own for those invertebrates to actually be able to move. They can't go very far. They stay close by. So they really need as many veteran or ancient trees as possible. They do better like that. So, I mean, you all know about the rest. You know, shelter for squirrels, badgers, dormice. This is what our very own Liverpool ancient tree, the Allerton oak, what it looks like. Now, it's only 5 meters. At the ancient tree inventory, we're told to measure at shoulder height. So we've got a sort of common height where we measure the diameter, the circumference, I beg your pardon, measure the circumference. And this one is measured at 5.5 meters. Some people have said that it's about 1,000 years old, but there's a lot of question marks around that, because a tree of 1,000 years old would probably be 10 meters circumference, not 5. So it's probably not that old. But are you going to count its rings? I don't think so. It's got no rings left. It's been totally eaten. It's totally hollow. So it's in one of its final stages of life, and it is an ancient tree. It's also covered in epiphytic growth. It's got lichens and mosses, and its branches are so heavy now that they have to be supported, or they would be off. We have a stump rather than a beautiful tree, but it is still getting leaves blooming each year, and that's due to all the sapwood that's still there. This is bigger than the Allerton oak. This is 7 meters 10, and it's one of the trees of national special interest, and it's in Nottingham. And you can see beautiful big. You can't really see from that picture that it's 7 meters around it, because I usually get my husband to stand by it with the dog. All of my pictures that I take myself, this was taken off the ancient tree inventory, where I'll give you the address in a minute, so you can go and have a look yourself at all of the ancient trees where you want. But you need something to show you the comparison. But here we can see the folds in the bark and the folds in the trunk, the holes in the crown, and you can see it's a beautiful old tree, but that's still got hundreds of years to go. I look at it. Now this is an ancient tree. This is the major tree, and evidently, allegedly, Robin Hood and his merry men used to live in that, because it's so big, it's so wonderful, it's totally hollow. It's dropped branches, but you can see it's still alive. The sapwood is still working. Can you imagine what habitat that is for bats, birds, wood-boring beetles, fungi? Can you imagine how wonderful that is? And that is in a forest. Most of the trees that I see are not in forests. They're in pasture land, and they're on I saw one on a barrow, an old barrow in Cheshire. But this one is in a forest, but it's still being cared for. All those branches excuse me, those branches would be falling. They need support because they're so big and heavy now. They're the size of a big tree. But here's one. You can see it in the winter. You can see its full beauty in the winter. Now this is a 10 metre, twice the size, twice the circumference of the Allerton oak, by the way. So this is a 10 metre tree in Ashby de la Zouch in Derbyshire. And it's splitting because that's what happens. Eventually, the branches will pull the tree apart. It's lost its heartwood. It's got very thin sapwood that's working overtime, and it pulls it apart. As you can see, it's cracked and hollow. It's lost its crown, and again, a wonderful habitat. But have a look in summer. You can hardly see it. It's still very vigorous and photosynthesizing and bringing down the sugars for that mycorrhizal fungi. Thank you. And this one is sort of a time lapse. You can see what it was like in 2009. Beautiful. It's showing you everything that's happened to it throughout its life, and it's had a long life. You can see it's had a long life. It's another oak, and that one will be about 800, 900 years old. You can see every twist in its branches, every twist and every knoll on its trunk. But look what's happened in 2020. It has started to split. It's started to pull apart, and that's why people who are interested in keeping that tree together, they've put the supports under the branches, because we don't want it to fall apart. We want to keep it as the wonderful habitat that it is. Thank you. And just to show you that it isn't just oak that becomes ancient. This is an ash. It's the Glenlyon ash, and it's in Scotland. Now, ash, well, you're lucky if ash lives for 300 years. This is going on past that, and it's 7 meters, 7 meters 18 in its circumference, in its girth, and still going strong. But there again, it's hollowed, it's lost all its heartwood. And when you look at that, you know it's a special ancient tree that's on the end of its life. But as you can see, in the summer, it's still working, it's still photosynthesizing, it's still producing leaves, and it's still doing a grand job there. It's on a slope. So if you are interested in seeing any ancient, veteran, or notable trees, notable haven't quite reached the age where they're, where you could say they were veteran. They haven't certainly reached the age where they're ancient. The ancient tree inventory, here you can see now the ATI, it belongs to the Woodland Trust. They have a map of Britain, and all you do is go to the website and do tree search. You don't have to join. If you want to, you can. It's totally free, and you can add trees to that. There's a way of adding your own trees to that. But see the orange trees on that, the orange bulbs on that, they are the ancient trees. So you can go throughout Britain and see where there are areas of ancient trees, and click on that, click on each one, and it will show you a picture of that tree, give you the dimensions, and some nice pictures of it. So I hope you've been inspired a little bit to actually visit that site and have a look at some of our beautiful ancient trees doing such a wonderful job. Okay, thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you.
Very interesting.
Extremely interesting, yeah. Okay, so that concludes the 2 talks that we had planned.